Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2000 prequel, The Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call this film cinematic rock bottom, but it's definitely not what I would call a gem. It's not a diamond in the rough. It's one of those movies that it's harmlessly bad. You know, it's not good. And there are definitely much better movies out there. But if I were tasked with watching this again versus watching those Smurfs live action movies or the Chipmunks live action films, I'm going to pick this every single time because this still at least has some effort put into it. There are some elements of the film that I honestly kind of don't mind. Rock Vegas, for instance. And everyone involved is giving their best effort despite everything that's just crumbling around them and an incredibly weak foundation. The film is directed by Brian Levant, who also directed the previous Flintstones film. And speaking of that film, as soon as that movie came out and was a massive hit in the box office, there were immediate plans to do a sequel. But John Goodman also immediately declined to return as Fred Flintstone because he never wanted to be Fred Flintstone to begin with. It was something he did to appease who was the king of Hollywood at the time, and Steven Spielberg, because Spielberg handpicked him to be Fred Flintstone in the live action Flintstones movie that Steven Spielberg wanted to uh, get off the ground. And because you don't upset the king of Hollywood, he went along with it. He said in interviews that he had fun shooting the film despite his trepidation, and he really did enjoy working with Rick Moranis, who played Barney in that movie. But it's not something that he ever wanted to do again. And that was already something that was really holding back a potential sequel in a pretty big way. But then you throw in Rick Moranis retiring from acting because of the tragic death of his wife and him deciding to focus full time on raising his kids. And now you don't have your two stars. You don't even have half of the duo of Fred and Barney from the 1994 film. So instead of just recasting them both and just doing another sequel, they decided to scrap the project, and I think for a understandable and good reason. Your two stars are not going to be able to commit to the film, and I believe this was supposed to come out in either '96 or '97. I think it was '97, but they probably would have started shooting sometime in '96 if it was going to come out in '97. Can you imagine, like 1997? You would have had Batman and Robin, Spawn, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, and a Flintstone sequel. Honestly, out of all of those, the Flintstone sequel probably had the best potential to be the best one out of all of those movies that actually came out that year. But it just wasn't meant to be, and the sequel was shelved. But sometime in like the late 90s, Hanna-Barbera and Universal decided to resurrect it. And instead of doing a sequel, they decided to make it a prequel. And that's how we have Viva Rock Vegas. And if you ask me, they should have just kept it shelved and instead focused on another Hanna-Barbera property for the year 2000 to start shooting in the late 90s. And that's the Jetsons. I have no idea why the Jetsons has not gotten a live action adaptation to this day. I think it was a missed opportunity. Should have made the Jetsons movie instead of Viva Rock Vegas. It would have done better financially because audiences were not really keen on a Flintstones live action prequel starring Mark Addy and Stephen Baldwin, who was hot off the success of Biodome. I mean, that's not something that audiences were clamoring for. You do a Jetsons movie with Danny DeVito as Spacely or Jim Carrey as George Jetson, you got a potential box office hit and a new franchise. But no, instead, let's spend $83 million on a Flintstones prequel that no one is asking for and no one wanted to see. Oh, it was a box office bomb? What a shocker. And I'm not going to be too hard or too rough on Brian Levant, for instance. His direction is fine. For the kind of movie that it is, it's not a bad directed film. Like, it's got some nice looking shots here and there, especially when it comes to showcasing Viva Rock Vegas and the casino and even other stuff like the amusement park and Bedrock, the various different animatronics and the puppetry. Uh, Baby Dino in particular is a really big standout. And Levant, I don't think he really did a job that was honestly any different than what he did in the previous film. It was solid. It was serviceable. It was good for the kind of film that it is. Had a nice energy to it, a nice bit of cartoon vitality. It wasn't one of those movies that didn't match the cartoon's energy. Levant, you could tell that he was having a good time doing another Flintstones movie. I think for Brian Levant, both of these films probably rank up there as some of his favorite films that he's directed. I guarantee it because the man is a diehard Flintstones fan. So he got to hang out with Hanna and Barbera. He got to, you know, do not just one but two Flintstones films. And his presence definitely does help this movie because I do feel that it would be significantly worse if you had a director who wasn't as passionate about it. Because you could just see the love for the characters and the love for Bedrock and just a love for the Flintstones as a property in every frame. And it's not necessarily something that I really enjoyed or I really liked, but I didn't hate it. I didn't hate Viva Rock Vegas. It was just another below average, misguided misfire. But it did have some good direction. I specifically like the way that Levant shot the Viva Rock Vegas scenes. I mean, it's not Viva Rock Vegas, but the Rock Vegas scenes. I like those scenes actually quite a bit. And even the sequence that takes place at the Burger King tie-in restaurant. Was I think it was Bronto King or something. Uh, Even those scenes were well shot. Good usage of camera angles, uh, perspectives, different camera techniques. Definitely one of the more consistent elements of the movie, quality wise, is the direction by Brian Levant. The script, though, by Deborah Kaplan, Harry Elfont, Jim Cash, and Jack Epps Jr., not so much. Four writers. It took four writers to come up with this generic plot of when Fred met Wilma and when Barney met Betty. That's a lot of writers to come up with such a generic plot line. I will say this, I think the script is a little bit better here than the script in the previous film because of the fact that Fred and Barney, they're together for the majority of the runtime. There isn't any sequences where they're apart from one another and they're mad at each other and they're no longer friends. You don't have that. They're friends through thick and thin throughout the majority of the production. There is a falling out between Fred and Wilma for a little bit, and between Barney and Betty for a chunk of the story, but it's not long, and it doesn't feel drawn out like the separation between Fred and Barney in the previous film. So that's definitely something that the script has going for it. You do get more of Fred and Barney together. So I will give the script props for that. But the stuff with Chip Rockefeller, who's this jealous former boyfriend of Wilma, who's setting up Fred and Barney and trying to essentially ruin their relationships with their girlfriends so he can come in and take Wilma away so he can pay off some gambling debts. Well, not really gambling debts, but to pay off some debts to the mob. It's not great. Once again, they have a bitchy mother-in-law thing. Why? I guess maybe it might have been something in the cartoon. Either way, it's just something that I never cared for, and I don't think ever works in any of these Flintstone movies. The scenes that focus on the mother-in-law are really hard to watch in both Flintstones films, not just Viva Rock Vegas. You don't have Bam Bam and Pebbles, which is fine because I think the stronger characters are Fred and Barney and Wilma and Betty. And I will give this, even though it is very cliched in terms of how they met, there's a certain way that things were written that it was honestly charming and sweet when it comes to the first time that Fred and Wilma meet each other and fall in love, or Betty and Barney do the same. The Great Gazoo, though, I don't know why the Great Gazoo is in this, other than, hey, that's a character from the cartoon that hasn't been adapted into live action. Let's throw him in here. He doesn't really serve much of a purpose. In all honesty, you could easily write him out of the movie and just change up a few things. Where there's a scene where Fred, I think, needs some inspiration. Well, instead of Gazoo being the one to do it, it's his friend Barney. You don't necessarily need a Gazoo at all, and Gazoo was just annoying anyway. So I don't think that really helped the movie having Gazoo in there, constantly calling Fred and Barney dum dums. The whole conflict when it finally does arise is just the typical cliched sitcom type plot about, oh, Wilma, she initially fell for Fred, but Fred thinks that he has to impress her with all this money and all of these all this jewelry and things like that. He can't give her a modest wedding ring. He's got to give her the biggest diamond ever because he finds out that she's a part of a wealthy family. And so he puts a strain in their relationship. Chip, this ex-boyfriend of Wilma's, takes advantage of that, makes him think that he's a high roller at the casino, but it's all a setup so that he can get him in debt and frame him for stealing Wilma's pearls. And I've always felt like that kind of subplot in particular is just so dumb. I never understood why anyone ever fell for these kind of things. Oh, Fred stole these pearls out of a locked safe. How? He doesn't even know the combination. And thankfully, the script does actually point that out, but the mob still agrees with Chip, and Fred and Barney gets into jail. And I'm like, why do they agree with the guy? Like, Barney explains it rather well. Like, he doesn't even know the combination to the safe of his bowling locker. How the hell is he gonna know the combination to a safe that he doesn't even own? But that's there because you have to have that conflict and that drama. There's also this stuff involving Betty where she doesn't trust Barney. She sees what looks like him cheating on her with this other girl, but she doesn't think about asking him or talking to him. She just assumes that he was cheating on her, and she decides to go and be with this Mick Jagger parody character, which that was definitely something that came out of left field, like a Mick Jagger parody. Like, really? Mick Jagged? Like, okay. So Mick Jagged starts a brief fling with Betty, and then Barney has to get her back. And just like the 1994 film, the script is just chock full of bad rock puns and dinosaur puns, and they even recycle the Jurassic Park gag from the first movie, but this time it's called Jurassic Park the Ride. There is still the juvenile humor. I didn't mention this in my review of the 1994 film, but there's a reason for that. I tried to wipe that from my brain. The scene with the pterodactyl taking a massive dump everywhere. Well, you have a repeat of that kind of juvenile humor here with a scene where a brontosaurus farts. I'm like, and that's like within like the first 5 minutes of the movie. So that's kind of a great example of this film's pretty pathetic humor. Oh, Brontosaurus fart joke. Great, lovely. That's so funny. And then the puns, and then the Great Gazoo, and the Great Gazoo getting annoyed at Barney because Barney's mispronouncing his name. Hey, it's the Great Kazoo. Uh, it's Gazoo, not Kazoo. Well, hey, Fred. What do you think about that? Uh, just did a really terrible impression, and for some reason, it almost I did a Stallone impression at the end too. Can you imagine Sylvester Stallone as Barney Rubble? Well, hey Fred. Hey, what about this alien guy? But yeah, it's not a good script. It really isn't. It's very TV pilot esque. And if it was a TV pilot, that would be acceptable. But it's a theatrical film, so this is unacceptable. And it's laziness, and it's uh just hackiness overall. It's just very hacking, very hammy, very lame script. Other than the love story angle, which yeah, it's tired, but there is a certain charm to it that I think kind of works. Or the friendship between Fred and Barney. Other than that stuff, everything else about it is just really weak and poor. It's not a good effort from four writers. That four writers, and this is the best that they could come up with. And the cast, I'm not going to be too hard on them either because of the fact that a lot of them, they were taking this job because it was an opportunity to get noticed, to get their foot in the door, especially for like Mark Addy. Like Mark Addy is Fred Flintstone. This is a significant get for him because prior to this, he did a lot of independent films. He was a part of the cast of The Full Monty, but he really wasn't getting a lot of roles in Hollywood. He was more of like an independent sort of actor. He was getting those kind of roles, so he wasn't really getting roles like this often. And I think he does a decent impression of Jackie Gleason here, and his performance is fine for a young Fred Flintstone. I honestly didn't think it was that bad. I really feel that the writing let him down more than his performance did. Stephen Baldwin, on the other hand, is Barney Rubble. Uh, I don't like his Barney. He does a much better impression of Barney than I do, but it's not like I would ever try to audition or try to be Barney Rubble. But that's really all that his performance is. It's a decent impression of Barney vocally, but when it comes to the physical comedy, when it comes to the chemistry with Mark Addy, it's really not there most of the time. There's a few scenes between him and Mark that work okay, but there's a lot of moments where the two have this kind of rocky connection and it's not good. And then for some reason his Barney Rubble is just more of a lunkhead than he is intelligent or smart. And if he is smart, it's just like one of those things where he's just accidentally smart. But the whole portrayal of the character is mostly, oh, look at Barney. He's a dumbass. He's a lunkhead. He's an idiot. Similar to the character that Stephen Baldwin played in Biodome. And I get why Stephen Baldwin took this, because this was a good paycheck for him, and it turned out to be the last theatrical film I think he ever starred in or co-starred in, because then it was just nothing but direct-to-video movies, like Absence of the Good, which I think he did before this. You know what's funny? That's a great way to sum up his acting career. Absence of the Good, for the most part, anyway. There are some roles that Steven did that he wasn't too bad in, but for the most part, his acting career is Absence of the Good, and his Barney Rubble is definitely up there. Kristen Johnston as Wilma. I didn't mind her, but I liked Elizabeth Perkins more. Uh, but she was fine. She was okay. I, I could definitely tell that she was, I don't know, kind of tapping into her sitcom roots, though, to play the character. Almost like it was an extension of her Third Rock from the Sun role. But, it wasn't a egregious performance by any means. Jane Krakowski is Betty O'Shale, though. I thought she was great. I thought Jane was really good. I thought she was the biggest standout out of the entire cast. She was so good. I wish that she was Betty in the 1994 film. Apparently, she was noticed and I think handpicked by Steven Spielberg. Like Spielberg saw her, I think, doing a play or doing some other project, and he told her that she would be a good Betty for Viva Rock Vegas. And because of the recommendation of Steven Spielberg, she decided to take the role. And I think it was a good role. I thought she did a really good job playing that character. Like I really liked that performance. I think it's pretty underrated, actually. Her performance as Betty in this. Thomas Gibson as Chip Rockefeller. Just a very just average kind of performance. Uh, the guy, he's more well known, playing Greg from Dharma and Greg, and he's better in that show than he is here. Alan Cumming as the Great Gazoo and Mick Jagged. I think he did a better job playing Mick Jagged than the Great Kazoo or Gazoo. Sorry, I butchered his name, and he doesn't like that. I don't care. The Great Gazoo sucks. I don't care if I said his name wrong. Uh, I've seen worse Alan Cumming performances. This isn't Son of the Mask. But it's still not what I would consider to be a shining moment for him. Harvey Korman, he voiced the Dictabird in the 1994 film. He's in this as Colonel Slaghoople, Wilma's father. Not one of his best roles either, but it was okay. Joan Collins, just awful as Pearl. Uh, you have Mel Blanc, who's voicing the puppy Dino. You have William Hanna and Joseph Barbera once again appear as themselves. You have Taylor Negron, who plays Gazam and Gazing, these aliens from Gazoo's race earlier on in the film. You have Tony Longo plays this gangster who's trying to get the money that Chip owes his boss. Danny Woodburn is also in it as Little Rocco, who works with Tony Longo. You have Rosie O'Donnell, who's the voice of the octopus, who gives Wilma and Betty massages in one scene. That's a more fitting role for Rosie O'Donnell, if you ask me, voicing a massage octopus than playing Betty. Uh, John Cho was in this as a parking valet, probably one of the earliest roles of his career. Just a random role where he's just a guy who just works for the Slag Hooples and parks cars. Um, yeah, the cast definitely not as good as the cast in the 1994 film, and you can't top John Goodman and Rick Moranis. Definitely not with Mark Addy and Stephen Baldwin of all people. Uh, the cinematography by Jamie Anderson is adequate. So is the editing by Kent Beta. The music by David Newman is just kind of more the same sort of stuff that he did in the previous film, which is understandable, but it's definitely not one of his more iconic or memorable scores. I wanted to mention one more thing about this film that is actually pretty good, and that's the practical effects. There's some really good practical effects in this, especially the baby Dino. That is a really great looking puppet, an animatronic by, I don't remember exactly who did it, but it looked really great. So yeah, some of the CGI in this is very dated too, but there's a good amount of practical stuff. Like the Rosie O'Donnell octopus also looked good. The other appliances that are being sold or being gifted at this party that Wilma was at also looked pretty cool and had some fun designs. And the art direction was also once again on point. So there is some enjoyment to be had from this film just to see the production design, the art direction again, and to see the practical effects. But because the novelty isn't the same as seeing it for the first time, like in the 94 film, it doesn't have the same lasting impression, but it was still something that was nice to see. I will admit that about this movie. But yeah, this is a bad film. But it's like 91 minutes, and that's with the end credits. It's around the same length of time as the first live action film. And like I said, it's the harmless kind of bad. You know, it's the kind of bad along the lines of like Adam's Family Reunion. You know, that equally misguided third Adam's Family movie that was meant to be a pilot for the Adams Family show, the new Adams Family. But then they decided to turn it into its own movie with Tim Curry and Daryl Hannah. It's that kind of thing where it's like it sucks and it's lame, but it's not bad in a way where like you hate yourself while you're watching it, or you feel like the people involved with the project or the film are just not fans of the source material and are just completely botching it or destroying the integrity of the source material. You don't get that vibe from this. It's just a forgettable, lame Flintstones movie. That's really what it is. Um, and I just don't know where the $83 million went. I'm still stunned by that number. $83 million didn't go to the cast. The biggest name here is Cummings. Yeah, it's the biggest name in the cast at the time. The biggest star is Alan Cumming. Sorry, I got Alan Cumming mixed up with somebody else. Jim Cummings. He's not really a star though. He's more of a voice actor. But it's one of those things where I would only recommend this if you're a diehard Flintstones fan. If not, definitely skip this one. You're not going to get much enjoyment out of this. But it's not a rant because of the fact that it's lame, it's forgettable, it's pretty bad, but I didn't hate it. It was just below average. I definitely get more out of John Candy singing the Flintstones theme and the and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles than I did out of this entire movie. How about you just watch that scene on a loop for an hour and a half? So that would be a much better use of your time than watching this. But anyway, that's my thoughts on the Flintstones and Viva Rock Vegas. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.